I feel like I need to defend my scene's honor here, because this is just turning into a bit of a dogpile.
Like in groups always look.
I'm cutting you off here. I'm cutting you off. Cutting you off. He said G2's winning it. He said G2's winning it.
We need to wait till the next EU tournament, which could be in about 10 years now.
Take it with like a grain of salt.
No,
but
that's
that
no
being
fun.
said,
Take it super literally.
Spike defused.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Press 4 to Defuse. You might say we have a new face this week. Anders is stepping in to fill in. We lost Sam somewhere in South Africa. Hopefully, we'll be able to find her next week. But for the time being, we do have Anders, who's willingly stepped in to help us out, come hang out, and talk a little bit of Valorant with us. How you doing, Anders?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be able to fill the empty seat.
Now, I probably should have asked this before we went live, but do you want me to call you Anders or do you want me to call you Martin?
Anders works. Martin works. Whatever floats your boat, really. I go by a billion names nowadays.
Being named Martin, how did you get at the gamer tag Anders?
So it's a really funny story. It's one of those instances where this is like 12-year-old brain to me. At the time, I was really into melodic death metal, particularly the Scandinavian band In Flames. And Anders Frieden, their lead singer, was like my perennial super idol at that time in my life. And so I just went with Anders, was like 12-year-old me who thought Z's were cool. So I added 2 Z's on the end and that's what we stuck with. And at a certain point, it was like sunk cost fallacy where I was just too deep down the rabbit hole to turn around. So that's where we're at.
There you go. That's how it goes. Ryan, how you doing this week?
I'm doing good. Nobody ever asks me where I got my username from, so...
I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right?
It is very straightforward.
Name. It's like mine. You just throw something in front of your name or after your name, boom, gamer tag.
It's the better way to go about it. It's the better way.
So we do have a lot of moves to talk about this week. A lot of things happened. I mean, we were talking about it when we were sort of setting up the episode outline. It's like, what roster moves actually happened this week, last week, what was rumored and then confirmed. There's been a million things, especially in the EU. So we're just going to go ahead and dive into it. The first one is a confirmation of a rumor that we already talked about, but Dimasic is on FPX. Fun plus Phoenix, they've got their complete 5 now. They made their one swap. We've got Dima in here. What do we make of this one? Ryan, you want to start us out here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it surprised quite a lot of people that FPX went with drop in Meadow literally the day after First Strike. I know that FPX didn't really have a good campaign in First Strike, but it was never really a team that seemed to have any weak links. And I think it says a lot about introducing a player like Dimmer in to change FPX's playstyle. A playstyle that I think a lot of people have seen him as being the grandfathers, I suppose, of that slow, methodical style, default-heavy, utility-focused. It seems that they want to be playing less passive with Meadow and have a bit more of an aggressive option with Dimmer, who, by the way, played First Strike in the CIS region, playing Raze and Reyna, so he's certainly flexible enough to play whatever's needed, but likely to be on that Sentinel role.
Ryan? Right, sorry. Anders, thoughts? You know, other person.
I could just repeat myself,
my brain is still waking up a little bit. It's just 1 PM my time. That's not a reasonable hour.
I think it's going to be super interesting because, to Ryan's point, bringing in anyone over Meadow was immediately sort of like a, hey, what the hell's going on moment, because I don't know of anyone who doesn't rate Meadow as like conservatively a bare minimum top 3 Sentinel in Europe. And so the fact that they were just sort of kicking him to the curb was a big like missing ping. But when you look at who they're now bringing in, confirmed with Dimasic, they wanted to upgrade firepower. Like they're looking to play more aggressively. And I think at some point, I don't know if it was Angel or someone else on the team made that sort of statement where it was like a stylistic decision to drop Meadow, because I think nobody would challenge that Meadow is an insanely good player. It was a stylistic meshing issue, and his passivity was the ultimate deciding factor in making that switch, I think. It'll be interesting to see what he is on, because I'm not wholly convinced that he'll end up on Sentinel. If he does, that'll be something. But I would be shocked if they don't sort of leave him on his home turf on like Reyna Raze, because I think that's where he's bread and butter and will really sort of feed into that style that they brought him on for.
And
I
think
mean,
that-
he did used to play Cypher before, didn't he? For like Worst Players, which was a team that had like Pipson on it. It had Chihuahua on,
that's
and
good
they
marketing
were
right
all
there.
just nutty players, right? So, I feel like it was Pekka that said what you quoted with them wanting a stylistic change, and he even said that Meadow's one of the best ciphers in the world. So it's kind of crazy that they dropped him, but you know, funnily enough, there's a very good video somewhere about like why Dimasic or
Where
what
could it be?
Dimasic can provide. Yeah. I started a new YouTube channel for the 2021 sort of New Year's resolution. But generally, we have the access to like heat maps and stuff like that through the API, and you can see that Dimasic is all over the place, the same as Pora when he's playing that role. But Meadow, a little bit more passive, and that's probably one of the reasons Angel wasn't having any of it.
I mean, it does certainly having that kind of aggression on the map just it can change the equation in terms of what kind of space you have to cover or how you're thinking about it. Yeah, maybe a more passive player you can kind of leave alone and not worry about it. But if you're shrinking the map, it's a lot less real estate to be concerned about. So we'll see how it plays out. I mean, what I would say is, yes, it was a little bit odd that after one sort of disappointing tournament, you know, right after First Strike, they made that move. They got rid of Meadow, but if you're gonna do it, that was the time to do it. That was the crux point. Now they figured out the one piece they want. We'll see how they do once we start to get back into tournament play in Europe. But there are a lot more things going on in Europe. Speaking of that, so we'll head on over to our next move. This next one is really interesting to me as a Counter-Strike guy, coming from Counter-Strike, and it's a bit of a head scratcher to be honest. Which is the fact that Liquid is apparently trialing Yugi for their Valorant roster, which I'm just going to lay a little bit of introduction here since he's just coming over from CS. He hasn't played Valorant at all, to my knowledge. I mean, apart from playing the game casually, presumably checking it out here or there. He was looking for a team in Counter-Strike, but I guess hasn't had the offers he was hoping for, so expanded that search out into Valorant. Was most recently playing for Astralis as one of their extended roster players, but he was one of the least successful of those pieces. They picked up Esatag, they picked up Bubsky, they picked up Yugi. Esatag they sold to Cloud9 for a bunch of money. Bubsky they still have on the roster. Yugi they cut. So Yugi used to be this sort of incredibly mechanically talented player who people looked at as being one of the next stars of the game. He was an AWPer. He's presumably still going to be an AWPer if he plays Valorant. But it's been a while since we've seen that. So this is a weird move. And he's supposedly trialing in place of Eccles. I don't know what to make of this one. Anders, you want to start us out here?
Yeah, so I mean, it really boils down to that last part for me. I think that based off the results, everyone knows that there is some sort of problem with TL. Like, if you don't think there's an issue with them, then you haven't watched their games. I think part of that is that they don't have a clear AWPer to utilize when they're on maps where that is really critical to succeeding. At the same time, though, dropping Eccles for an AWPer is just not the ticket, in my opinion. I think that is looking at their team, knowing there's an issue, knowing they need to make a change, but not knowing how to make that change. I think that when you have someone like Eccles, who is an incredibly high flexibility player, has experience IGLing, so has a great game for the brain, great brain for the game, holy moly, on both a like
He's
micro
got game
decision
too.
make.
We don't know that. We don't know how his game is.
He definitely has hands. Like, that's the thing, is he's solid mechanically, great brain on both a macro and micro level, and he plays a role that is chronically underplayed at a high level. Like, name me the top 5 breaches in EU, I'll wait. People will have like 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 they can think of, and then there's Bupkis. Like, actually just nothing. And so
Especially
the fact
at
that,
the top level.
exactly. And so the fact that you are dropping someone who has played Breach extremely successfully, been able to pivot onto Controller to pretty considerable success, so you know that they're a high flexibility individual and can slot into really anything you need, and you're now just saying, yeah, we're going to bring in an AWPer instead of you, when we have 2 other players on our team who are noteworthily underperforming in their roles relative to the rest of the ecosystem, that is a giant what the F in my book.
Ryan?
I think it's an interesting one because you said that like Team Liquid have been struggling if you disagree, you haven't been watching them. You have to bear in mind that they did lose a very close series against Heretics, who ended up winning all of First Strike. And really, that was winnable for Team Liquid if they didn't implode, certainly on the final map of Bind. I feel that this is such a gamble that makes very little sense. Not only were they doing it in place of Eccles in the team, but they also swapped out Soulcast. So one of those players' heads could be on the docket for sure. But honestly, as disappointing as Team Liquid have been, I would just prefer them to keep what they have right now. It's not even a time thing. I think Ninjas in Pajamas suffered from that, where it's like this team could do a lot better if you actually give them more than 2 months to actually get some work in and improve as a team without removing players and switching around the roles like Ninjas in Pajamas did a lot of. For Team Liquid, they just need to let go of their ego and play in every tournament that they can. I think Team Heretics look like a better team because they played in the Spanish circuit. I think a lot of NA teams have improved dramatically because they play in every tournament that they can get their hands on. With any luck going into 2021, we get quite a lot more events, certainly in Europe, other than the main Champions circuit. And if I'm Sliggy, if I'm Team Liquid, we are signing up to do everyone. We want to get those official times in, like we want to get those official games played because we need to gain that experience. We've seen them play like 4 times in the past 6 months or something on the stream, and they really need to increase that. Just get a bit of time under their belts and improve as a solid lineup because they have the players. They just fall apart every time we get to watch them.
It's an interesting take. I mean, it's sort of like it's the debate between online on LAN sometimes, which obviously we can't have yet, but one day we'll be able to have, of like when the pressure is on, things fall apart, and then is that worth making a change, or is that an experience thing and just, you know, time on server, time actually competing as opposed to scrimming where the pressure isn't there. I just saw someone in chat. I've heard the name Nerd Street Gamers before. Are you guys in Philly? Nerd Street Gamers is located in Philly. Used to be on North 3rd Street. The new location's on Broad, I think. That'll be happening when things can happen again. So that's just the quick aside here. Yes, Philly-based. I live in Philly. These 2 other guys don't. We're importing them on the World Wide Web.
Been to Philly.
I was going to say, Ryan's super close.
Have
Only
you been
like
to Philly?
Couple
I went for the Grand Finals Overwatch League Season 2. We stayed in the Old Town. It's very nice.
Oh yeah. Old Town's a good part of the city. Yeah, no. Well, I'm glad you've experienced the city. It's good times. Back to Overwatch. No, Valorant. What game? I'm having a rough day here, guys, on the old brain box. But we're gonna talk about the next one. I'm pretty sure we've already kind of done this one to death. It's just more confirmed, not confirmed, but rumored. More rumors coming out from Nell. We're talking about G2 Zeke, the missing piece for G2. Nell has been talking about this one for a little bit of a while. He was trialing for them, and then they really liked him, so they kept trialing for him, and they've kept trialing with him, and it seems at this point he's probably been trialing long enough that he's getting signed. That generally seems to be my take on the pulse of the situation. Does that sound about right, Ryan and Anders?
Pretty much. I mean, it comes as no surprise, really. I think Zeke would be a really nice fit for G2 in just a typical player that can play a lot of stuff and is very aggressive and can get a lot of stuff done. But the issue, of course, is that G2 dropped David P because they wanted an IGL, and Zeke really isn't that. So I'm not really sure what the plan is. It's a very G2 move to kind of go, we really need like an IGL, somebody that can slow down the play. And then Callus just goes, nope, we want another like batshit crazy DPS player to come in and do the Lord's work. And that has been Zeke. And I like the move, but it doesn't really solve the issue that G2 as a team have. Maybe they've just accepted it and just figured we're going to play to that as part of our strengths, being a very puggy, very individually, mechanically sound team, but maybe lacking on the team play coordination.
Anders?
It is definitely a decision that, now that it's more or less confirmed, like, it shows that G2 is sort of veering away from the game plan that people thought they were embarking on when they brought on Mike's. Like, people were like, oh yeah, they're definitely going to try to implement a lot more structure to the way that they play, et cetera, et cetera. And then they're like, no, we're going straight back to scrappy. Good luck, have fun. That's how this reads to me. I have a lot of interest in whether or not they're going to be able to replicate the level of success that they had with this style up until now, or if the maturity of the scene has gotten to a point where even a scarier iteration of that Puggy style just won't be able to get traction anymore. We'll see.
That is interesting because it does generally, the more time people have on in a game, the more those teams kind of fall away, right? Because as you, and especially as more agents come into the pool, as there's more ways to apply utility and it becomes increasingly complex, the links you can have between them, that Puggy style does tend to sort of fade out a little bit. It feels a bit like a move where, you know, you go to the store to buy the essentials, but then you're hungry and you wander down the snack aisle and suddenly the cart's full of chips and ramen and that's what you're going home with. We'll see how it works out. I mean, the reality is with G2, they won everything until they didn't. And then they really didn't.
It worked great until it didn't. That's the story of their team.
So, I think a key aspect of that is going to be Ardis, though, because they can play various styles with Zeke. He's a flexible player, but the issue is he is pretty much the same hero pool and plays in near enough the same way as Ardis on a couple of heroes. The only difference is I think Zeke is a much more aggressive, more frag-centric solver, but that doesn't inherently mean that he holds W and finds fights. He's just so good at getting a lot of damage in. But even Mixwell on the Raze, another agent that Zeke plays, Mixwell has been picking up the Raze as well as the Jet in First Strike, and he actually had some pretty solid stats. He didn't look completely terrible like he did, I think, in the LID Sports tournament, where he played one game of Raze on Haven, I think against Giants or something, and he was terrible. He was absolutely dog when it came to how he played that agent. So I think Ardis, you could move him over to the Breach. He's played that a little bit. You can have Zeke over on the Sova, or you can run double duelist, try to play it a bit more like DNA teams and go from there. So they have more options, and I think David P was okay on the Sage and the Breach, but he was just okay. And G2 clearly want to have insane players across all of the different roles and seeing what they can do there.
This is a super weird analogy to use, but for people who know League of Legends, what G2 is doing in Valorant reminds me of what they did in League, where in League they had like second best mid laner in all of Europe, arguably the best mid laner in all of Europe, and they needed a new bot lane carry, a new AD carry for the next season. So what did they do? They didn't go out and recruited like the next best AD carry in the region. They poached the other best mid laner and then just had them role swap. And it feels like they're doing the same kind of thing here. They're like, we're not going to get the person that actually fits this role. We're just going to yoink someone who's mechanically outrageous and force it in and see what happens.
Square peg, round hole kind of situation, but a really good square peg. I don't know. We'll see. It is interesting to me. I mean, we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but it just feels like there's so much churn going on in EU, and there's really not to the same degree in North America. I mean, it feels like we had much more churn, 2 months ago before First Strike. But it's just interesting to see all of the top teams be like, all right, now's the time. Churn them and burn them. Try a new system. Let's see if it works here. Speaking of which, we have another top org potentially coming into the scene. This is a roster we've had little bits and pieces rumored. We've had pieces signed. Now it seems like we're going to have a full roster. We've got the Vitality signing coming through. And I'm just going to pull up the full roster here. That image is just of Nell's tweet. But according to a report from Nell, the team is going to be Brams, Machina, Fuq, Vac, and Sender, with Fragon as the coach. What do we make of this team? Do we think they can compete at the top?
Oh, yeah.
Holy shit is the only thing I can say about this roster. If they're not top 3, they're doing something wrong. They have all of the pieces they need to be top 3.
Which seems ridiculous, I guess, because you look at those players and none of them really stand out of the page. I think you look at Exile, they had a decent run in First Strike generally. I don't think they really blew people's minds too much because they had a really decent game against Summon, but Summon ended up winning out 2-0. Machina for Purple Cobras looked good, but a bit streaky. But let's be honest, what Jet Op doesn't look streaky at the best of times. So really, Brams being that sort of main player, most likely the IGL on this team. You've got Sender in, who's certainly one of the most underrated players, I think, in Europe across the board. I know Strong is probably shaking his head, raising his drink on that one, because I remember watching Sender really early on again. This guy isn't that good. He misses a lot of his utility, misses a lot of his ultimate, but as time went on, he improved and he looked like the only sane player on that roster because everybody else was in straitjackets running around the map trying to kill whatever they could. Fiku's that kind of player as well on the Cypher. So there's so much coming in. Vac is certainly one of the players that has deserved to be on an org more than anybody else, I think, because he has been grinding since day one, put Nolpenki together, reorganized Nolpenki to have it as a European team. It would be really cool to see him in a Vitality jacket, as well as Vitality, of course, being the best Counter-Strike team, seem to have really good foundations to setting up Frag and the head coach to succeed. They're going to be there supporting their team, not the kind of org that goes, you go and doing your own thing. We're just going to back off. Yeah. They're going to be really good in this scene.
It's if they follow the model that they used in Counter-Strike as well, it could be hugely successful because they've empowered their coach. They brought on, I mean, obviously they have Ziwu, who, again, I don't know how familiar either of you are with. He's just insane.
No, never heard of him. Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. His face wasn't plastered across Paris or whatever city it was.
That made me so happy when that happened. Just to see
that was pretty
in
hype.
Paris. It's like,
I know jack all about CS, but that was still like, okay, this is pretty pog.
He's basically he is inarguably one of the two best players currently playing the game, likely one of the two best players to ever play the game, and arguably the best player to ever play the game. Without a doubt, the most immediately talented player to ever play the game. Like, just immediate dominance. It's insane. But they're probably not quite going to have that in Valorant, right? Like, that's the lottery ticket.
It's the opposite. I don't know if Anders agrees, but there's no particular player on this roster that stands out as oh my god, they're insane. Just everybody is very good, but in an unsuspecting way. It's not like adding Yugi to a roster. It's the complete opposite. It's just 5 really good players put together in a solid foundational team.
This might be like a bit of a troll take, but like the way I see it is Fragon is like the highest power name on that lineup in my opinion.
Yeah, as bad as it sounds, yeah.
The coach is the most prestigious name on the lineup, which is to a certain degree, like part of why it's so intriguing and awesome to me is because you have 5 players that I feel like you would see on like a Moneyball documentary 5 years down the road where like they're underappreciated players, but if you look at their stats and really dive down into the way that they play, they're all incredibly high potential and high skill. And so if you put them in a position where they do have like a high potency, high efficacy coach, they could be really terrifying really fast.
I think the key thing as well is what you said before, Anders, about like the top 5 players. Certainly for Breach, for example, you kind of get so
when
far.
You mentioned Sender, I was like, hey.
Yeah, well, I mean, like it took. I mean, Strong basically convinced me. I'll be brutally honest. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. But it really feels like it's one of those things where if you look at the Breaches of Europe, you will list. All right, who have we got? We got Shadow. Most people will be like, oh, Shadow's all right. Like, no, Shadow is very, very good. You just don't see it in the stats. You don't really see it in the play just because he's performing a role in the team. Eccles certainly isn't bad. Even David P wasn't a terrible Breach, but Sender is certainly one of the strongest, but doesn't pad out his stats by running and gunning like he's Elementrix when it comes to playing the Breach. He's very much a team player, and I think everybody on that roster is. Nobody stand out. I think a lot of those names might not trigger anybody to really understand how good this team is, but that's the beauty of it. I think I'm really excited to see these guys play. They could be terrible, don't get me wrong, but there's potential here for sure.
I gotta be
the
honest.
whole is more important than the pieces. That's like the 1-sentence summary of that team.
That's beautiful. Everything you guys have just said just gets me really excited to see this roster in action. I've been arguing for years about the undervaluing of the coaching role and like just not giving coaches authority over their players being one of the chief issues that we see in FPS esports, and I'm into it. We're gonna hop across the pond now because we're running long on time as per the usual. We're gonna talk about the couple of NA moves. There hasn't been much movement in NA. It's sort of been very quiet over the holidays. But there have been some players who become I pressed the wrong button. That's the wrong one available. Don't worry about that. No one saw that. It definitely wasn't the old topic. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. But suffice it to say, Vanity is competing in Valorant now. Vanity coming over from Counter-Strike, most recently part of the Chaos team. Chaos left the CS in general. They dropped all of their teams actually, so Chaos is out of fielding competitive teams, and they're going to be a clothing brand, I guess. But big bummer for the CS scene, big gain for the Valorant scene, because most of those players are coming over. We already had Leaf on Cloud9. Now we've got Vanity, who's going to be playing with Beast Coast this weekend. He hasn't signed with them as of this point, but he is going to be competing. He's been playing Valorant, seems to have been enjoying it since the dissolution of Chaos. He's a very talented player, very smart player as well. He was calling the shots over there. He took up the mantle from Steel when Steel made his transition to Valorant. Vanity could be the next of these big Counter-Strike transitions. What do we make of this one? Anders, you want to start us out here?
Like I said, I don't have a ton of background on CS, but I know that when Chaos sort of started booming, I looked a little bit into all of their players and started speculating where they might land. I will say that Beast Coast was not on any of those lists. So it's interesting to see that of all places, that's where he ends up. It's one of those things where I am hesitant to make any sort of speculation on how good CS players are going to be when they transfer over. Like across the board, I'm like, all that you being in CS tells me is that you're going to be mechanically sound and have decent fundamentals. That tells me nothing else about your ability to play this game.
Right.
And so without having seen Vanity play Valorant, it is a TBD in my eyes. Like Beast Coast is a firmly middling roster in my opinion. It will be very exciting if he can push them over the top, although I don't see a universe where even if he comes in as a complete juggernaut, he would be the type of push that they need to be like a clear T1 team.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one really because it's always a mixed bag with Counter-Strike players coming across. You could have a Steel or a Nitro, or you could have a Yugi who didn't do that well in his tryouts with Liquid, and I think there's been a number of certain Counter-Strike players that have come across and not really being able to do as much. So very excited to see him play. I'm surprised that he didn't get any bigger offers just based off of what he was able to do on Chaos, but I guess he sort of has to earn his keep now, and what better team and what kind of scrappy team, I suppose, with decent fundamentals as well with Beast Coast. They should be able to do something, certainly with some of the teams in the complexity tournament, but it'd be interesting to see how he does on an individual level as well.
I was just going to say, looking at this move, I don't think he's signed to Beast Coast. And I don't know if he intends to. I think he's playing with them for this tournament. And I think that Vanity is a smart enough cookie that he's going to take his time and sort of figure out what kind of offers he can get through and also show what he can do in the scene to elicit better offers before he commits to a team. So I think that I think he probably did receive some offers. I don't know what exactly. I have no clue in that. No details there. But I think that if I'm Vanity, I'm trying to do an audition, right? Show off in this tournament, show what he can do, show that he actually does know how to play Valorant, and that there's something there that's worth investing in, and then seeing what kind of offers that bait can bring in. It's going to be interesting. He's a smart player. You wouldn't know it from looking at his Twitter, because he is a big old shit poster.
Oh yeah, he's a big memer.
Big shit poster. But he's a smarter cookie than he lets on. He is mechanically very talented. He's not gonna be one of these guys who's just like god tier aim, like you can't, untouchable mechanical ability. But he's very good for still being able to call and have a brain when he was competing in CS. So I am curious to see how he adapts to Valorant. He's someone whose career I followed for quite a while in CS, who I've enjoyed seeing rise through the ranks. And he's also part of these, when we're talking about transplants from CS to Valorant. There's sort of a couple tiers of those players. There's the players who are super washed in CS and like are making this change as the retirement home or like the revitalization home. And those tend to be the ones that are very hit or miss. That's not Vanity. In a healthy NA ecosystem, Vanity should have been snapped up for a contract immediately by a Counter-Strike team. We just don't have that in NA right now, so he's making the move. Like the fact that the Chaos team wasn't immediately signed is a failure of the CS scene. Not
definitely
judgment on the players.
I think like in a perfect scenario, if you're a new org, you come in and you sign him as your first player because he's the kind of person that I feel has been able to build from the ground up on a few occasions now and being able to sort of make a name the old-fashioned way, which in Counter-Strike that's very difficult to do because a lot of those orgs were established for 5 to 10 years in some cases. Valorant, everything is new. Your reputation will grow or fall depending on how you do in this game. So I do feel, yeah, I agree that I don't think his time on Beast Coast is going to be a very long one, but if there are other rogues waiting to get involved, I think Vanity is certainly one of the first names you'll look at, because yeah, he's very new to Valorant, but you know that he's going to be able to help put together a solid team that can succeed in areas where, if he is playing very passive, like people in chat saying he'd be great on the Omen, for example, you know that he's going to put solid fraggers ahead of him and other solid support players in and around him too on different agents.
He's
We
also...
just like it
Oh, go ahead.
inadvertently ran the entire like evolutionary arc of what I think might happen with him. You have like me, the skeptic of will he transfer to Valorant effectively, and then oh yes, he's basically publicly trialing to multiple teams by playing on Beast Coast. Like he's going there to show whether or not he transfers effectively, and then he's either going to go to a tier 1 team or, to Ryan's point, potentially become the anchor of an entirely new team. So like I think that is very much so his story arc as it begins.
I'm also going to say this, and I mean this as affectionately as possible. Anthony is also a cocky shit. So he's great from a content perspective. He's a fantastic interview. He makes good org content. Like, he's just an interesting character to follow. And again, I say that as affectionately as possible. But yeah,
like Evil Geniuses come in, sign Vanity, and then they sign Leaf afterwards. There you go. That's the start of a great team.
It'd be interesting, just build Chaos again in Valorant. I know a lot of those guys are going to be
buy out Steel as well, like J-Rush is fine. I like the theory that he could be a stand-in for Nitro. That's a cool thing that I could definitely see happening.
That'd be interesting.
But it's just whether he's had enough time or not, more than anything.
That'd be wild. That'd be terrifying.
I would say if that happens, if they do bring him in as a stand-in, this is like complete conjecture, that would be the biggest endorsement by Steel that you could possibly get. That'd be like the personal stamp of like, yeah, play with this guy. All right, we're gonna move on from Vanity for now. I am super curious to see how he does this weekend with Beast Coast. I honestly have no idea like how his individual performance is going to be. Again, to your point, Anders, Beast Coast has done nothing of interest, to be quite frank, since their entry into the Valorant space. They were one of those teams that came in and I was like, oh yeah, I've heard of that org. And then I never heard of them again. Even though I knew players in that roster, they just didn't do anything of interest. So maybe the spark they need, they could certainly use one. They could use several, probably.
They're not bad. I'm not flaming them, but like they just
good.
haven't put up a result that's noteworthy. That's the reality. It's like, okay,
they got second in the Pulse tournament, but they lost to Member Mode Gaming. So really, there's not too much other than like a couple of surprise wins. But I mean, it's a feels bad with MMG, but
I just realized I didn't put that on the docket, but we're definitely going to talk about that one because
that's juicy.
Let's talk about it at the end because
talk about it at the end because we're already over time. All right, next thing. Luminosity seems like they're making some changes. None of this is announced. None of this is even discussed. But their roster on the Battle 5 for the upcoming Complexity tournament we're going to be talking about is not the roster that they previously played with. We've got Thief, Stellar, and a Proto returning, and then we've got ya boy Dre and Moose coming in to round out the roster. Trainer, if anyone doesn't know, is their coach. So Luminosity change up. Do we think this is going to be a stronger LG? Do we think this is the shot in the arm they need? Do we think this is where the momentum builds for LG?
So who did they drop? They dropped KZ's and they dropped... Who was the final player on this team?
My brain... I'm going to pull it up now.
Proto and Thief are still on that lineup. That's the one thing I care about. I think those are the two best players on that team. If they're changing pieces around those two, then sure, whatever. I'll see how it pans out for you. As long as those two are still on your lineup, I think you're still solid. I think that... I forget which event it was. It might have been like the first strike qualifier where Luminosity just came out of the gates swinging and not like swinging softly, but with like a metal baseball bat kind of swinging. And I feel like they haven't kindled that kind of excitement since then. It'll be interesting to see if this can catalyze that sort of momentum again. I think that they have the potential to be far more successful than they have shown recently. This is one of the teams that I think is very much so like high upset potential, kind of a sleeper pick.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like they're sort of in amongst the likes of Renegades, Built by Gamers, Space Station Gaming is a very unassuming team, and they've had great moments, same as like Renegades getting to first strike, for example. So they're a team that has been able to do more than most, but I still think that this might take a while. Like Luminosity, what I said before about Team Liquid wanting to play, like it's a similar thing. I think a lot of teams like LG, Andbox, NRG are doing this at the moment, where they're just playing in every tournament that they can get their hands on. Luminosity could do quite a lot in this tournament. I would certainly say that they're the top, like out of the 16 teams in here, they're certainly the top 8, so they should be making playoffs depending on what groups they're in. But yeah, it's exciting, but I will save my opinion on what I expect from them until after this tournament, really, because it could go either way, because all of the teams in around them are improving or having roster changes or just trying to potentially change up the way that they play. So LG could be on a positive trajectory with these changes, but at the same time, everybody else is. So what does it matter?
For me, Moose is the X factor here. That's interesting because Moose is one of these guys who's, for years in Counter-Strike, he's insanely mechanically gifted, very, very talented. You have these moments where he's just the best player on the server, no question. But then he'll also go missing sometimes. Like, he's had a bit of a mercurial up and down career. He's been part of teams that have just kind of tapered off and fallen apart. I don't know. He's a good guy. He's not... The issue is not, like, toxicity. That's not what I'm trying to imply here. He's a nice person. But it's just... He's never quite had the success that he was pegged for. He was one of these rising stars who never quite got to that next level in Counter-Strike. And I am very curious to see if maybe this is the kind of team, this is the kind of environment where that talent can come through in Valorant. But this is a good segue into talking about the Complexity event. So let's go ahead and do it. There's the Complexity $10,000 Valorant Invitational. Complexity X Nerd Street Gamers partnership going on here. Plug the channel that we're on. It'll be here. It'll be here. You won't have to wait long to watch it. That's going to be this weekend, the 9th and the 10th. I just want to say quickly, they're still announcing teams for it, but all the teams are listed on the Battlefy, so I don't know if we're leaking here, but I'm just going to pull up the Battlefy.
If it's on Battlefy, it's not leaking.
Right?
I'm just going to put that out there.
Right? Like, hey, we're revealing the teams. We're debuting them officially on the Nerd Street channel, except not officially. We're just going to show it. These are the 16 teams. I love the little logos the Battlefy has for the captains. Very adorable. Andbox, Xset, Built by Gamers, Luminosity, who we just talked about, Space Station, Time In, Carpe Noctum, who are new, I believe, NRG, Prospects, Equinox, Projects, exclamation mark, which was the former Mamba mode, which we might get enough time to talk about, Beast Coast, who we talked about, Renegades, Dignitas, Complexity, and Elysium to round it all out. Now, there were a few teams that I think were announced and then backed out, and then they came in, and it's all a little confusing, but these are the 16 teams that we're actually going to have competing, barring a last-minute change. We talked about a couple of them. Give me one team that you're both excited for. Anders, we'll start out with you. I don't speak good today. I just don't speak good today. Anders, take it away.
I have a coin flip. So,
okay.
Ryan, which team are you doing?
I was going to say Andbox.
Okay, then I'm doing the other one that I was going to do. Because I was going to do either Andbox or I was going to do NRG, because I think if the final isn't them two, then either bad bracket luck or one of them is underperforming. I think that if one of those teams doesn't win it, something wild happened. I think that they are very clearly the two best teams in this event. I think Andbox is like sort of the obvious higher priority of the two, but I think that with their recent flair, NRG is a team that you should be afraid of if you're in this event. Like if you have them in the first or second round, you are big unlucko sort of thing. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out. I think that with them bringing on Shanks, like they've got firepower for days, and it will be interesting to see if they can consistently top sort of a tier 2 soup like this, because that's really what this event is. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, not going to call it something it's not. Like, this event is a tier 2 soup. You don't have any of the tier 1 teams. Whoever wins this event is the person who is trying to make the case that they're a tier 1 team.
I think, well, that's the thing about NRG, is it's just more to see if their previous tournament was a flash in the pan or not, because
Exactly. Yeah.
they looked good with their roster moves, which goes against everything that everybody was saying with all of the roster moves. Even on this podcast, I think we've been very critical on how NRG have conducted themselves.
Yeah.
And Box, it's the opposite. First Strike didn't go their way for obvious reasons, right? With Poach getting ill and Wardino having to step in. Now there's been enough of a break that they have a clear disconnect from everything that's happened before. They start 2021 fresh, and so it's, can Unbox perform at the level that we expect from them, or was it even bad luck for First Strike and a little bit of them underperforming in some aspects, in some games at least? So, like, that's what I'm curious about, whether Unbox can still live up to the hype that people have put pressure on it. I feel obliged to mention Dignitas, considering Odorous is kicking up a storm in Twitch chat, but again, it's a similar thing where I think they looked good in First Strike. I think they got better as time went on, but kind of like I said before, Renegades actually got to the event. NRG, as much as people might dislike the way that they've been working, have looked better. Even Time In are doing quite a lot of good work at the moment. And you've got some interesting stuff with the ex-Mamba Mode Gaming guys playing under Project Exclamation Mark, I think it is. So this could really go to 6 to 8 different teams in the final. But Ambox, I think, is certainly going to be the one that, if they don't get there, kind of like Anders said, then you start to cast a bit more doubt over this team.
All right, let me build some hype narratives here. First of all, I want a Time In Built by Gamers matchup. Groups, playoffs, I don't care when it happens. I just want the grudge match. If anyone's not familiar, that was the whole dispute that happened in the Knights tournament where there were accusations of cheating against Critical. Built by Gamers were disqualified after beating Time In. Then they were undisqualified. Then they bowed out of the tournament. Whole kerfuffle. Yeah. I want the grudge match for the storyline. I want that. And then, you know, I'm going to represent my boy Odorous, who's in the chat. We're going to say Dignitas. I think they got a strong showing here. I don't know if you saw, they brought back the old logo, the classic sperm icon.
Yeah.
It's called the Digi or whatever. It's a sperm. It always has been. It's not gray anymore, which does ruin the, like, that weird off-white gray does ruin the illusion just a little bit. But I'm so happy they brought back the old logo. I think that's the kick they need. I think I
didn't see that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's back. It was interesting to begin with as a team, but, you know, I'm feeling Dignitas. And then, and I know this isn't going to be popular, and I know it's not based in any sort of reality, but I'm the #1 Complexity Valorant fanboy, so I've got to throw this in somewhere. Complexity, is this finally going to be the event where they do something? Please let it be. Their name's on the tournament. Come on, guys. I just want to see ya pop off. They have these games. They have these rounds. They have these tournaments where you're like, man, they played really good games against the person who eventually won the tournament. But it's always in, like, quarters. So they never make it that deep. And I want to see a deep run. So those are my hype trains right now. That's what I'll throw it on. I don't know. Bold predictions. Who's going to win the tournament? I want to hear about your finals. I want to hear, period, who's going to win the tournament. Before we even know groups, before we know matchups. One team.
Andbox. That's such a cop-out answer, but, like, I'm a stats guy. If you don't say Andbox, then, like, you're creating content. Like, okay. That's the bottom line. Like, the odds on bet is Andbox, and anyone who says otherwise, like, just is ignoring numbers and, like, any objective rational argument for the event.
All right, Ryan, say otherwise.
I want to say otherwise. I'm trying to think of who takes my
I'll say otherwise.
My interest
the
most.
To think about it.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna go with a long shot bet. I'm gonna go Complexity in their own event. Do I think it's likely to happen? No, but if it happens,
I would love to see it.
That'd
be great.
Story. Hell yeah!
I love Riley and the boys finally bringing it home. They have all the pieces to make something happen. It just hasn't worked out for them yet.
I'm gonna go for the new project Mamba Mode Gaming. Like, what a story that would be.
That'd be amazing.
Being neglected by their org and then coming in and winning an event. They have the potential to. They've done really well in previous events beforehand, so maybe the kind of weight off their shoulders to an extent might be able to help them put in a solid performance. But like I mentioned, could be 3 or 4 teams up for the runnings.
All right. Here we go. Should we talk about that whole situation? Should we talk about it? Have we gotten through all of our shenanigans? Oh, I did have one other storyline that I put on our roster, which is how many people can Josh RT fit onto the Prospects roster? It's just,
Including fill-ins, I bet you their Liquipedia page is like you gotta scroll for 8 minutes to get to the bottom
So
of it.
I looked. The Liquipedia page only has 4 people listed as active members, even though there's like 14. I mean, even just in the Battle5 page, they've got 7 people signed up. Although I think 2 of them. I mean, Keith is, I think, Seaside Keith, so he's definitely coaching, and I think Roy, Stronglegs Roy, is probably coaching as well. So I guess that's only 5 players. And some coaching staff / fill-ins, but still, just the man's a roster builder, and he just keeps building. He's not content with 5; he wants more. But yeah, that's enough about complexity. Do we want to talk about this Mamba mode thing to wrap up the show? Yeah,
Let's send it. Let's do it.
Yeah. I mean, there isn't too much to say. It's just a shitty situation to be in.
I put out a
feel.
tweet chain the night after this happened. I actually wrote it at 2 a.m. and then slept on it, put it out in the morning of things to look for to find shitty orgs or to recognize shitty orgs. This one I felt was kind of inevitable from the first time I saw Mamba mode. The obvious mark that Mamba mode was going to fall apart at some point was that their entire brand identity was built around Kobe Bryant, and that is not legally defensible. You're gonna get your ass sued if you ever make any money.
We won our first major event. Here's a cease and desist.
Right? Come on. I get it. The Mamba mentality is something to aspire to as a competitor. It's a cool brand, which is why he built it. But he built it. You can't just start an org and be like, yeah, we're going to use his colors. We're going to use a logo. We're going to build it around his identity. No, you're going to get your ass sued. Come on. So immediately when I saw that, it's okay, well, they have not thought very far into the future. Right? This is a student running an org. He's a college kid. I'm not saying college kids can't build good things, but I was that young once. I didn't think that far into the future most of the time.
It was so weird. Because I remember casting the Pulse event, which is its whole story in itself, and it was the first time that I had ever casted Mamba Mode Gaming, but also the first time that I'd ever seen them in a tier 2 tournament. They'd been doing at least a bit of stuff in the Nerd Street monthlies, for example, but really they weren't seen at all. And I remember seeing them constantly in me in Twitch chat, pointing out and trying to meme on the fact that I didn't know who they were. Sort of it was weird, imagine Ryan not knowing who we are, lol. And it's just shut up. This isn't really good for your brand if it's just trying to pick fights with a caster who's these guys have won stuff over the last week, but this is the first time that I've seen them, and it's the first time that a lot of people heard
first
them.
impression.
Yeah, right? It's just a bit of a weird thing to do, off your official, Twitter account as well, to just kind of come in and be oh, you don't know who we are, then you're an idiot. And that's not really a good look. I don't know. I feel like it's sign emoji, so we don't have to see this org spamming. It was really cringe. I found it, and I don't usually find Twitch chat cringe, but I found that specifically really awkward because it was just spamming the same things over and over again, and it's kind of if I'm casting you and you're doing that, I'm not going to be a fan of your team. So I don't know. That was the point where I stopped caring about that team, to be brutally honest. But it's North America. I don't care about any of the teams.
I mean,
go ahead, Anders.
I've worked in think tanks. I currently work for a college. Everything about MMG and this is a hot take and kind of shit talky, but
hit it.
Send it.
Yeah.
Everything about that org screamed, I'm being run by college kids.
Yes.
There was a lack of any semblance of powerful oversight. It was very fly by the seat of your pants. And that's not to say that college kids aren't capable of creating incredible things. There were some parts of MMG that were very clearly well done. There were other parts of it that screamed unprofessionalism. It was an absolute mess. And so the fact that it imploded the way it did wasn't a surprise. It was an inevitability. It was just a matter of how long until it goes public of all of the shady stuff that's happening behind closed doors. Typical tier 2 stuff.
I will say one thing that they did that I actually liked was during the community casting side of First Strike, before we really got into the official casts, they streamed their own games and had the TO, the owner of the team or whoever watching their games, talking to Twitch chat and sort of cheering their team on as they're playing. And I thought that was a really smart idea, and I think a lot of other teams should have done that, especially
It's like
if you.
super budget myth for TSM is basically
Yeah.
what they're doing. It's just like a great PR exercise.
Because people are wanting to watch those games as well, so you
Yeah.
could just stream off the Orcs Twitch channel, talk to chat, and cheer on the guys, and watch the game that isn't being watched anywhere else, right? So, yeah, I thought that was a smart thing, but unfortunately, that seemed to be it. Other than winning the Pulse event, they really didn't do much. You got We Did that tried to go somewhere else, but that kind of fell on its ass a little bit. So, in any case, the players did not deserve this. I think that's worth reaffirming.
Yes. I think that's
there are
very
some
important.
players on that lineup that, I mean, we see that they're playing under like a project exclamation point in complexity, but like a player like Chase, he should have tier 1 team prospects. He's cracked. Like I won't beat around that bush. Like he's insanely good. And Payne is also like, if he goes free agent, one of the best free agent sentinels in NA right now. So like they're great players. They have a lot of potential.
One thing I will say is it is a bit of a tragedy for the players, and if anyone's not familiar, apparently the owner disappeared with prize money, which is the main concern for the players. Like those contracts, they're void at this point, but there was a couple $1,000s in prize money that was supposed to be paid out to the players. That
He
never got
came
paid
back.
out.
He
Did he?
came back and streamed Tower Defense.
No, he didn't stream it. He just someone saw him.
He was playing it.
on
His
Oh,
team profile. Yeah.
Someone just saw him
Oh,
playing
I thought it was.
Blues.
I
No,
was
he's
like
not
that.
that
That's
ball, dude.
crazy
He's
shit.
not
If
that
he's
ball,
just
man.
going off the wall, like
No,
I am
no.
ignoring everything and just streaming
No,
Tower
no.
Defense 6 on Twitch.
Man
I
just
was
playing
like,
it.
who is this guy?
Didn't hit the
That's like
invisible on Steam.
whatever crack he's on. I want some of it because that's something else. But
Basically, it
anyway,
was just evidence
clearly
that
that didn't
wasn't
happen.
like that. It wasn't like he died or disappeared or got hospitalized or something, which would explain his absence. Like he was playing balloons, so he's just gone.
Neglected everything and started playing balloons. To be honest, I same. I can feel that
Yeah,
energy quite a lot.
relatable.
I do
Yeah,
also
exactly.
want to say, as someone who has suffered from like anxiety and depression in the past, it is possible that the dude is having like an episode of some sort of deal with like, and if that's the case, I sympathize. But the reality is, he is still leaving his players in the lurch and disappearing with money. And it's one
I
thing
think-
to disappear from responsibility; it's another thing to disappear with the cash. Like
Yeah,
that's bad.
I feel I just want to sort of rein in like all of the shit that I've been given, considering I've been very defensive on how Pulse has gone about stuff. Like, yeah, it's COVID. Sometimes running a business doesn't go to plan. Doesn't excuse Pulse for the fact that they haven't paid any of their players or talent players, including Mamba Mud Gaming that won that tournament. So that doesn't help the owner as well if he's wanting to pay his players with prize money that they never got. So, yeah, it sucks, but it's one of those things, kind of like we said with Pulse at the end of the day, that you need to have a plan in place. And whilst COVID is a bit of a nightmare, a lot of other teams have managed to thrive in this by changing the way that they go about stuff. So there could be some terrible stuff happening there, but at the same time, it should never come to this at any point. And with any luck, those players get paid what they're owed.
That is, I think, our message to send it off on is please, whatever you want to do, whether you want to come back into the scene or whether you want to leave the scene, just give the money that's owed, settle everything, close the books, end that chapter. The org didn't work out, that's fine. People can fail and come back from that, and it's okay. Just pay what's owed, and all's forgiven. Or at least, all's buried in the past. That's all we need. That's all we need. I think that is going to wrap up our show, though, because we're about to hit the hour mark, which is twice as long as we're supposed to go, but about as long as we usually do. Thank you so much for everyone who tuned in. This was a very fun episode of Press 4. Huge thank you to Anders for coming on and doing this show with us. He is you're perennially, like, making your points in chat, which we love to see. It's good to have you on camera to make the points live. So yeah, huge thank you for you to coming on. Thank you to everyone who followed and watched. If you enjoyed the show, please do follow this Twitch channel. Obviously, the Complexity Invitational is going to be happening on it this weekend. If it's not happening on the Complexity channel, I don't actually know. But follow us all on Twitter. You can find our @s down below our faces. Definitely follow Anders if you don't already. He is one of the best Valorant Twitter account follows that you can find to get all the information, the data science, the videos, whatever you need. Follow him. We'll see you next week. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
And we're clear.